When you were a youngster, 3 or 4 years old, what was your favorite nursery rhyme? I had one. And it was later in life that I learned that embedded in that nursery rhyme was an important lesson. Now, nursery rhymes tend to have embedded important messages. For instance, Mary had a little lamb. A little lamb, a little lamb. Mary had a little lamb. Its fleece was white as snow. What's the valuable communication lesson in that nursery rhyme? The lesson is, if you can't think of what to say next, just keep repeating yourself till something comes to mind. What was your favorite? Mine was Jack Be Nimble. In fact, I can remember a little 3-year-old me standing at a back window of a bedroom in our house over in the Oak Cliff section of Dallas, peering out the window and reciting that poem to no one in particular. Jack be nimble, Jack be quick, Jack jump over the candlestick. Except I had him jumping over the candlestick. I had a terrible lisp. I've later thought it was a person with a cruel sense of humor who decided to spell lisp with an S. Now, these many years later, fortunately no longer sporting the lisp, I'm talking about Jack and his candlestick again. This time with leaders, executives, and entrepreneurs, who I point to this story because there is a valuable life lesson in there for us in our leadership and executive roles, in our organizational roles. The message is that we need to have organizations that are a lot like Jack. Nimble, quick, and able to bound over any obstacle in its path. In other words, as leaders, we need to be building organizations that are characterized by agility, speed, and innovation. The agility to turn on a dime without losing momentum. The speed to deliver quickly without losing quality or customer care. The ability to innovate so that we always stay on the leading edge. Speed, agility, innovation. I've been sharing that message, sounding that message in corporate circles for 20 years. But today's a bit of a unique opportunity. This is the first time that I've taken those themes and spoken to an audience that's largely made up of government workers. And as I was preparing, it became very apparent to me that the way that I framed those three for corporate audiences really wasn't apropos or even relevant to what many of you are doing on a day-by-day basis. And so I thought, how am I going to approach this topic with this group? And then it struck me that I was invited to do this here by the Alliance for Innovation. You've been invited to be here today because your government is part of the Alliance for Innovation. So what if we spent this time focusing on what is innovation and what are the challenges in implementing it? I've always been a fan of technology and innovation. I was one of those people who already had owned 2 or 3 desktop computers before IBM came out with the PC and Apple came out with the Macintosh. I was fascinated with cutting-edge technology. And one of the things that fascinated me was the product of innovation, not so much the process of it. But that all changed in 2006 or so. I was just getting ready to release the first edition of my book, Leadership and the Power of Trust. One day the phone rang and it was Ross Smith at Microsoft. Ross at the time was the head of what was called Microsoft's Windows Core Security division. A team of about 80 of the brightest engineers that you could find anywhere, whose job it was to fortify Microsoft products against that world of hackers out there who were always trying to exploit its vulnerabilities. Ross had come across an early review of my book, a pre-publication review on the internet. And his request was, could you perchance provide me an advanced copy in an electronic form with permission for me to share it with 16 of my colleagues, and then when the book comes out, send me 16 copies along with an invoice and I will settle with you. We're working on a project right now, though, that we really need what I think is in your book. And so this advanced copy would keep us on pace. Eventually, his order expanded to 30, and then 35, and an invitation to come to the Microsoft campus in Washington and spend time with his 80-member team. When I sat down with him, I was immediately intrigued by the experiment they were in the middle of. They were experimenting to see if by increasing the trust within their organization, they could accelerate the speed of innovation. Suddenly, I was thrown into the middle of looking at the process by which we empower innovation rather than simply profiting from the products of innovation myself. As I worked with them, the question they kept asking was, how can we build a culture that fosters innovation? And so here these people were looking at innovation as a team sport. In fact, it was sitting there talking with them that for the first time, I began to think of innovation as a team sport. Before that, I had always thought of the word innovation as associated with individuals, with a Thomas Edison, a Henry Ford, a Bill Gates, a Steve Jobs. But these people were going up against the most sophisticated hackers in the world. They had to be at the top of their game, dealing with technology that was so complex and a challenge that was so real and so pressing that no one or two people could adequately meet the challenge. They had to have a team working together as a team in order to produce the innovation they needed. But it struck me as I listened to them that they not only saw innovation as a team sport, that they saw the process of creating an atmosphere or a culture in which innovation occurs as a team sport. And that's really what I want to focus on today. Over the next few weeks, they took principles out of my book, and they created a masterful set of techniques and approaches to enhance trust within their culture, working with this hypothesis that if they could increase trust, they could increase innovation. I watched from afar as they refined this process. And fairly soon, the data started to suggest that they were onto something. In fairly short order, their effectiveness at identifying vulnerabilities in Microsoft products went up by 28.5%. On their annual review, they asked people, do you feel empowered? Not just empowered, but encouraged to constantly pursue innovative ways to do your job better. That question was asked annually over the next few years, and every year it would go up by 10 or 15% until finally 97% of the workers agreed with that statement. And then the proof in the pudding was an internal event at Microsoft. Each year they put on what was called an innovation fair, in which members of their organization were invited to put on a display, sort of like a science fair in high school, showcasing something that they were developing or had developed that was innovative. And for the next few years, Ross's team won the competition year after year after year. They had demonstrated that there is a direct link between building high-trust organizations and creating a climate that's friendly toward innovation. And yet, I don't think they ever ask the question, what is innovation? What is it that we're doing when we innovate? You see, a lot of things that pass for innovation, because that's what we call them, aren't really innovation. If you examine them closely, they're just a good example of ingenuity or inventiveness, but they aren't really innovation. Innovation involves change that is substantial enough that it is more than just a new way to go about something we're already doing. It is something that absolutely revolutionizes the way we think about and the way we approach an enterprise. In fact, for innovation to occur, three things are necessary. First, we have to have a culture that encourages and celebrates innovation. If we don't have that culture, innovation is not likely to be commonplace in our organization. Number two, innovation calls for a novel idea that holds out a realistic promise of bringing about some desired breakthrough. And third, innovation has to be implemented in a robust implementation that provides some value or benefit not hitherto available to us. So there are the three things: a culture of innovation, a novel idea with the promise of some great value or benefit, and third, a successful implementation. So let's talk about culture for a moment. I don't know if you've noticed it, but culture isn't particularly friendly to change. It tends to dig in its heels and fight it. Why is that? Well, it's because of what culture is intended to do. One of the functions of culture is to give stability and predictability to interpersonal relationships. Anywhere that people start functioning together, pretty quickly a culture is going to emerge. It's not one that will be imposed, it is simply one that will evolve. In short order, there will be certain ways to do things, certain ways not to do them. Certain things we value, certain things we don't. Things that we talk freely about, things that we avoid talking about. Certain ways to tackle problems, certain ways to settle differences. A culture begins to emerge, and it gives us predictability as to how people will react when I do certain things. Now, some of us enjoy a lot of options and enjoy a lot of flexibility and the opportunity for novel things to be going on. We like variety. Others don't really care for that. But even those who really love variety don't want to work in a world where everything is constantly in upheaval and change. We all need some stability. And culture provides predictability and stability. But what happens then is that when you come along with change, and innovation is a big change, the culture starts fighting back because it sees its role as to keep things the way they are. And the more drastic your innovation, the larger the sweep of your innovation, the more the culture is going to push back. That's its nature. That's its job, to keep things predictable and stable. One of the most interesting metaphors to describe this is from a woman named Virginia Satir, who pioneered the area that we today call conjoint family therapy. Virginia was at the apex of her career in the 50s and was one of the first people to begin working with families in therapy rather than working with people one-on-one. And she began to see that families develop their own culture. And she started thinking of that family culture as a family system. In fact, she gave us a lot of the vocabulary that's still used today to describe family systems. As she looked at family systems, she realized that family systems operate like all other systems. The function of a system is to keep things in balance. So we have a HVAC system in this room whose purpose is to keep things at a balance point insofar as temperature and humidity is concerned, so that people are not sweating like I am right now. We have an electrical system whose purpose is to keep things at a balanced luminosity. Your car has heating systems and cooling systems whose purpose is to keep the temperature of your vehicle at a balanced temperature. And so the purpose of systems is to maintain balance. Accounting systems keep the books balanced. Inventory systems keep the right balance of things on the shelf. Systems, therefore, resist anything that disturbs the balance. Culture is a kind of system. Well, what Virginia noticed is that you can think of a system like a mobile suspended from a ceiling. And there are various elements in this mobile, and when it hangs motionless, it's because they have established themselves at the balance point for that mobile. If you walk up to it and you tap one of those elements, the mobile will begin to dance. And the whole purpose of the dance is to get things back in balance. Now, if you just tap it, it will have a dance. But if you walk up and slap it, the dance gets very dramatic very quickly. We need to think of corporate culture as like that mobile. If you slap it, it will fight back. It will go into an elaborate dance to reestablish the balance point it's trying to preserve. And so for those of us who are innovators, one of the challenges is that we need to approach innovation incrementally if it's a sweeping innovation. You see, if I slap that mobile, even if I tap it, it's going to eventually get back to its original balance point. But what if I walked over to it and I took a paper clip and I put it on one element of the mobile, and then stepped back, and it would dance a little bit, and it would establish balance again, but the balance point is slightly shifted. And then I put another paper clip on it, and the balance point shifts some more. And little by little, it ends up in a completely different balance that is the balance that I was pursuing. Those of us who are innovatively minded tend to want to push the innovation too fast. And we get a pushback from our culture that is that mobile trying to reestablish its balance point. And where we can, and we can't always do it, I've headed some innovative efforts that we did not have the time to do it. Incremental change is more desirable and in the long run more effective than simply coming in and making wholesale change. But we've got to then, even as we're going at things incrementally, be continually promoting a culture that is receptive to change, that is receptive to innovation. So what Ross and his team did was to set out first to create that kind of culture. And they spent months really focused on how can we create a culture of innovation rather than how can we innovate. So that's their story. But now a second story. This was a group of men, innovators, who wanted to offer the public discounted fares by keeping their costs down so much that they could pass the savings along to their customers in the form of cheaper fares. They had a major problem. It was called the federal government. Those were the days of regulated airfares. Using the Interstate Commerce Clause as their justification, the federal government said, we can regulate fares for airlines, and so this is what you will charge for these kinds of flights, for these kinds of operating hours. And there was no provision anywhere in federal regulations to offer discounted fares. Sitting, having drinks together one night, these men said, it's interstate fare regulation. Novel idea. What if your airline never crossed a state line? Would you be subject to interstate fare regulations if you operated entirely within one state? See, there's the novel idea. The other thing the novel idea did that innovation does is it violated, maybe that's too strong a word, it found a way around some conventional thinking that put limits on what we could do. They said, this is the box everybody is operating in. can we challenge conventionality on that? How could we circumvent the regulation? And so the idea was, let's operate just within the state of Texas. And so on a napkin, they very quickly drew out their routes. There would be 3 cities: Dallas, San Antonio, and Houston. Be 4 planes, 1 in backup, the other 3 in movement all the time. And with that, they went out and began the court challenges they had to go through to get a decision that, yes, they had the freedom to discount fares if they were operating as they had decided, and to launch Southwest Airlines. I was living on the West Coast at the time, and I remember flying into Love Field right after they had begun operations, and as I was going to baggage claim, I came across their ticket counter, if you could call it that. It was little more than a desk with a placard there that said discount fares to San Antonio and Houston. And I remember thinking, how on earth do they ever expect to operate a profitable airline flying to only 3 cities? Little did I know. When finally, a few years later, they had expanded to the whole state of Texas, and the feds lifted the regulatory environment, they were perfectly poised to take the airline national. And in all their years of operation, they've only lost money 1 time. Annually, they are one of the most profitable, if not the most profitable airline in the United States. So what they did, they had a novel idea. It was a novel idea that broke with convention. It was a novel idea that they could develop into a robust implementation. And it was a novel idea that would provide benefits and value not previously available. That takes us back to answer the question that I posed early on. What is innovation? Not everything that's called innovation is innovative. When I ask people, tell me what innovation is, the most frequent answer I get is thinking outside the box. Well, I don't want to disappoint anyone, but thinking is not innovation. Now, every innovation begins with a clever thought, with a new way of thinking about things. But as long as I'm thinking about it, I'm not innovating it. Innovation comes only when there is full implementation. And in the process of going from novel idea to robust implementation and demonstrating that this model will work and give the benefit that is promised, I want to suggest that it's a team sport all the way through. The team sport approach to innovation is there because we live in a world in which the ideas that are really breakthroughs usually involve having expertise in so many different fields that no one person can be a master of everything that needs to be known in order to pull that innovation off. Now, there was a time, not that many years ago, a few decades ago, when one person could stay abreast of all the changes and all the new knowledge and all the scientific breakthroughs that were necessary to exploit in order to make a given innovation. But not any longer. Our corporate systems are too complex. Our world is changing so rapidly. The technology has become so complex that to innovate we need to think of it as a team sport. And at every stage of innovation, from creating the culture to implementing the innovative idea, we've got to approach it from a team standpoint. One of the other reasons that it's a team sport is because those of us who are inclined toward innovation aren't always good at implementation. I'm being confessional here. I'll be honest with you. I'm fairly innovative in my thinking because I love solving problems. And the more complex the problem, the more energized I get in tackling it, and the more fulfillment I get from coming up with that solution. But when it comes time to implement the solution, I'm not the best person to do that. The reason is pretty simple. I get my fulfillment from solving the problem, not executing the solution. And so when I begin to execute the solution, I have my attention focused on the things that have to be accomplished. But out of the corner of my eye, I see this other problem over here that's begging for a solution. Have you ever been driving down the road and got captivated by a billboard off to the side and began to read the billboard? And where did the car head before long? Off toward the billboard. Well, see, I'm trying to drive this implementation, but I'm reading the billboard, the problem over here. And what's going through my mind is, man, that's an interesting problem. Wonder how I would solve that. Oh, no, I've got to stick with this implementation. And so I work on this Oh, wait a minute. Now, how would I solve that? Oh, I got to get back to this. When I get finished, I'm going to go tackle that one. Now, that is the flat side on my wheel. I use that term because the man who was my lifelong mentor used it a dozen times a year with me. He sort of took me under wing when I was in my late 20s. We continued to be good friends until his passing a few years ago. And if he said to me once, he said to me 100 times, we all have a flat side on our wheel somewhere. The sooner we recognize that flat side and build people and systems around us to compensate for it, the sooner we will be successful and the more successful we will be. I think that is some of the wisest advice I've ever been given. It calls on us to have the humility to really face what is the flat side on my wheel. And I had to face up to the fact early on that I love solving the problem. I was not good at executing this solution. And so wherever I had the choice to choose my number two person, whether in higher education or the military or church life, wherever that I could choose the number two person, I went looking for somebody who loved execution, loved implementation, and who had the strength of ego that they would not hesitate for a moment to say, hey, boss, the wheels are about to come off over here because you're off solving that problem and not paying enough attention to the execution. They would hold me accountable. They would hold me to task. I needed that colleague. Well, I have since discovered in coaching now over 700 executives and entrepreneurs, many of them very imaginative, very innovative, that there is a propensity for those of us who love innovation to love solving the problem but not be particularly effective at executing the solution, implementing the resolution of an issue that has bothered us or our organization or even mankind for some time. That being said, we need teams when it comes to the implementation of innovation, because some are going to be the ones who conceive the new breakthrough and figure out how to make it happen, but it's going to be others who bring astute skills to making the implementation robust. And I keep using that term, robust. What is a robust implementation? Well, it's one that is widely accepted and widely imitated or widely utilized. If you come up with a great innovative idea and you come up with a demonstration that it will work, but it's not much more than just a viability demonstration, you still don't have an innovation. Because until there is a robust implementation of it so that we see that it really solves a problem and solves it across a lot of different contexts, in a lot of different situations, in a lot of different scenarios, it's still just sort of a novel idea that's floating around. A few years ago, two guys approached me to be a consultant to them. Two guys who were really innovative. They had come up with the novel idea of a product while sitting one day watching a football game. And as they watched the football game, a play occurred, and one of them said, "Man, I would like to have seen that through the eyes of the player on the field who just executed the play. That was brilliant." And they said, "Why couldn't we do that? Why couldn't we allow fans to watch the game from the perspective of their favorite player on the field?" And so with that question, they set out to see if such an invention was possible. By the time they contacted me, they already had developed a prototype, a camera that would fit onto a helmet. They had proven that the idea was feasible, but there were still a lot of obstacles that had to be overcome before it was marketable, not the least of which was reliability. You see, their idea was that you as a fan could sit with your personal device, a pad or a cell phone, and you could watch the play unfold through the eyes of the player on the field. They thought there'd be a lot of interest in that. And everyone I've ever talked to about that idea is like, "Yeah, man, I'd like to be able to do that." But if you were going to do it, it had to be able to stand up to the impact on the field and still send a reliable signal to the sideline. Number two, neither the professional nor collegiate arena were going to accept it unless it was shown to be safe in all of the impact that goes on in a football game. But the real obstacle was, how do we send multiple signals from the field to the sideline into a system that can process them all fast enough that they can get them to you, the viewer, in real time? Huge technological challenge. And quite honestly, we never solved it. We spent 2 years working with the NFL, with the Southeastern Conference, who used our helmets in practice, gave us a great opportunity to field test the equipment. We found a helmet manufacturer who did all the safety testing for us and got the helmet validated for collegiate and professional use. The USFL even used some footage occasionally on some of their broadcasts and put them on their telecast. But we could never solve that fundamental problem due to a number of technical problems that we had never even anticipated until we started working with the stadiums around the country. Now, was their idea workable? Yeah. Would it have brought a benefit that people would have paid money to take advantage of? Yeah. Was it imaginative and novel? Yeah. Was it an innovation? No. It never got robust implementation because there was a problem there we couldn't solve. Could we have anticipated that problem earlier and found a way to wire around it? Perhaps, if we had tackled it as a team sport. But we were tackling it as two or three of us, talking to this expert and getting a little bit of information, and talking to that expert and getting a little bit of information, instead of bringing the expertise into our circle, so that we were looking at all the moving pieces that had to be coordinated just exactly right if this was going to be able to get a robust implementation. So what are our takeaways today? The first takeaway is not everything that's called innovation deserves the title. Many things that are called innovation are just examples of ingenuity, inventiveness, imaginative thinking. You know, back during the First World War, Will Rogers was asked, what are we going to do about the German U-boat threat? The German submarines were sinking merchant ships all over the Atlantic. And Rogers said, well, it's really pretty simple. What we have to do is wait until we learn through naval intelligence that all the German U-boats are at sea at the same time, and then we just boil the Atlantic Ocean, and they'll all float to the top nice and pink and rosy. Perfect. And someone said, well, how do you propose to boil the Atlantic Ocean? And his response, in effect, was, oh, I'm just the grand strategist. Somebody else has to work out the technical details. You may have had some of those thinkers around you in some of the organizations you've been with. They were good at coming up with ideas that were not at all feasible or practical. That's why I said we start off with a novel idea that has that reasonable promise of giving us a benefit. It needs to be a reasonable promise. So, first of all, not everything that's called innovation is innovation. Let's be sure that we are thinking about the term properly. Because if we settle for just ingenuity and inventiveness and call it innovation, we will never stretch our imagination and stretch our creativity the way it has to be stretched if innovation conforms with these standards that we've been talking about today. The second takeaway is build the culture of innovation first before you start putting together the mechanics of how you're going to innovate. If the culture is not supportive of it, whatever innovation you are able to create will not be, in all likelihood, profound or enduring in the sense of other innovations following on the heels of it. Warren Buffett has said, culture eats strategy for lunch. And I think that pretty much sums it up. Think about culture first and foremost. We don't tend to put that at the forefront of our thinking when we're looking at how we're going to be an innovative community, an innovative company, an innovative government. The third thing is, in every stage of innovation, whether it's defining that culture, fleshing out the novel idea, creating the robust implementation, make it a team sport. Make it a collaborative enterprise that, as in Ross's organization, brings together tremendous expertise, all with the same objective of finding the breakthroughs we need to be where we have got to go if we're going to be agile, speedy, and innovative. And one bonus takeaway. Don't fall in love with your innovation. Even if you were the person who primarily parented it, if it is your baby, your child, don't fall in love with it. Innovation is basically designed to become obsolete. Even if the innovation has been around for a long, long period of time. I mean, how recently have you used your BlackBerry? All right? Technologies come and go. Innovative spirits live on. And that innovative spirit that lives on is going to start challenging your novel idea and start looking for a way to circumvent whatever box your novel idea has put them in. All technology is made to become outmoded. All innovation is in the process of becoming outmoded once we create a culture where people are continually looking for that next innovative breakthrough. So, as you return to your organizations, build organizations that are like Jack. They're nimble, they're quick, they use innovation to become even more nimble and more quick. But in all of it, first and foremost, make innovation a team sport. Thank you.